Footsteps in the night. Hello everyone. I am Storyteller, and today I bring you a true horror story, but this time longer, more detailed. Like the video and subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more scary stories. Now, turn off the lights, put on your headphones and relax. I still remember the first night I heard it. I work as an accountant for a marketing company. Our office is on the third floor of a large building. Most employees leave at 6 p.m., but I often stay late to finish my work. That night, as usual, I was alone. The hallway was dark and quiet, with only a dim light from the security light. I was working when I suddenly heard footsteps outside the door. Clack, clack, clack. I stopped. Could it be the security guard? But the footsteps were slow, steady, not hurried. I walked out into the hallway, but there was no one there. The silence was terrifying. I went back to work, but the feeling of unease continued to haunt me. About 10 minutes later, the footsteps rang out again. This time, they were closer. They stopped right in front of my office door. My heart pounded. I waited, but there was no knock, no voice. I took a deep breath, walked to the door, and opened it. No one was there. I shivered. I decided to check. Turning on all the hallway lights, I walked slowly, listening around. The small conference room was empty. The break area was empty, too. But when I turned around, a storage room door was slightly open. I distinctly remembered it being closed when I passed by earlier. I walked closer, my heart pounding. The door opened, and it was pitch black inside. I slowly raised my phone, turning on the flashlight. The light illuminated the empty room, but just as I was about to turn away, a figure passed by the corner. I jumped and backed away. I blinked, but saw nothing. Could it be a stress-induced hallucination? I told myself I was imagining things. However, I couldn't continue working. I packed up my things and left the office. When I got into the elevator, I felt something was wrong. It felt like someone was staring at me. The elevator reached the first floor. I stepped out and saw the security guard dozing on the chair. I was about to wake him up, but then stopped. What I had experienced was not the business of the police or the security guard. The next morning, I arrived earlier than usual. I looked for the cleaning crew and asked if anyone had gone to the third floor at night. They looked at me in confusion. No, we only go there in the morning. I felt a chill down my spine. So, who did I hear last night? In the following days, I started to pay more attention. Every night, I always heard footsteps. But I didn't dare open the door anymore. I tried to ignore them, but one night, everything changed. It was 9:45 p.m. I was packing up when I heard a soft laugh. A small, faint sound, but it echoed in the dark hallway. I froze. The laugh didn't sound like a normal person's. It was distorted, cold, as if it came from somewhere far away. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and hurried out of the office. As I walked down the hallway, I didn't dare look to either side. But as I approached the elevator, I saw a figure standing silently in the far corner. A dark figure, tall, thin, head tilted to one side. I couldn't see its face, but I knew, it was looking at me. The elevator opened, and I rushed in, pressing the button repeatedly. The doors closed, and I gasped. When the doors opened on the first floor, I ran straight out without looking back. I quit my job the very next day. But every night, I still have the feeling that I haven't really gotten over it. What do you think of this story? Leave your comments below. If you like stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the next video, if you dare to watch at night. Footwaits in the night. I don't like working late. Not because I'm lazy or irresponsible, but because there's something about this office, when it's dark, that makes me uncomfortable. That day was no different. I was so busy with work that by the time I realized it, it was 8 o'clock. The last colleagues who had stayed with me had left at 8:30. I was the last one on the top floor. I tried to concentrate on my work, completing spreadsheets and double-checking my numbers. The silence was eerily quiet. Only the steady clacking of keyboards could be heard. At about 9:15, I heard footsteps. Steady. Unhurried. Someone was pacing the empty hallway. I froze. Who else would be here at this hour? My first instinct was to ignore it. It must have been my imagination. But as the footsteps continued to echo, getting closer, I couldn't ignore them any longer. I turned off the desk lamp and sat quietly in the dark. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it. I strained my ears to listen. The footsteps stopped right outside my office door. I didn't dare breathe. Was someone there? If so, why didn't they knock? A minute. 2 minutes. Nothing happened. I gathered my courage, slowly reached for the doorknob, and opened it a crack. The hallway was empty. A chill ran down my spine. I flipped the light switch in the hallway, but the fluorescent lights flickered for a moment before coming back on fully. No one was there. I stepped out, walking down the hallway to check. Every door was locked. The small waiting room was empty. The conference room at the end of the hallway was empty, too. There was no way anyone could have left without me seeing or hearing them. At that moment, my stomach churned. A sense of unease welled up inside me. I returned to the office, quickly packed up my things, and left. I took the elevator down to the ground floor, passing the security desk. The guard sat there, looking bored. I considered telling him what I had heard, but then felt foolish. I must have been just tired. The next morning, I told my supervisor about this. She was a practical person and didn't believe in ghosts. Maybe someone stayed late, she said. I checked. No one was there. She suggested looking at the security cameras. The building had cameras on every floor, and I knew if anyone had been in the hallways, we would have seen them. We went to the security office. The guard on duty quickly pulled up the footage from the night before. But just as he was about to press play, I felt a strange fear rise up in me. My supervisor looked at me, raising an eyebrow. Are you sure you want to see it? I hesitated. If there was nothing on the screen, it meant I was imagining it all. But if there was something. The thought of seeing a figure on the screen made my skin crawl. Finally, I shook my head. No need. I'm probably just tired. She shrugged and let it go. I tried to tell myself that I was overreacting. But the unsettling feeling stayed with me all day. Around noon, my phone vibrated. It was a text message from the supervisor. I won't bother with the camera footage unless something more serious happens. It's probably just a ghost playing tricks on you, I didn't find it funny. I tried to leave early that day. By 7 o'clock, I had packed up everything and was getting into the elevator. But then I remembered, I had forgotten an important file in the office. I stopped the elevator, my chest tightening. I didn't want to go back, but I had to. The third floor was darker than usual. I quickly walked down the hallway, entered the office, turned on the overhead light, and picked up the file. Everything looked normal. There were no strange sounds. I breathed a sigh of relief. But then, the overhead light flickered. I froze. Fluorescent lights flickered, right? Nothing scary. I closed the office door and walked toward the elevator. The hallway was colder than usual. Footsteps echoed again. This time, they came from behind me. I almost dropped the file. I turned around, but there was no one. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. The footsteps continued. They were coming toward me, getting closer. I couldn't see anything, but I heard them clearly. I backed away, my back hitting the elevator door. I pressed the call button hastily, my hands shaking so much I missed the first time. The footsteps stopped, only about 5 feet away. I couldn't see anyone, but I felt a presence. The elevator doors opened. Without thinking, I rushed inside, slamming my fist on the close button. Just before the doors closed, I saw the hallway lights go out. Darkness swallowed everything, steps in the night. I had never believed in the paranormal. They were just stories to scare children, or thrilling anecdotes that people told each other late at night. But after that experience, I wasn't so sure anymore. It was a normal evening, or so I thought. A backlog of work forced me to stay late, after the last of my colleagues had left, leaving the office in an ominous silence. I didn't like working late, but deadlines waited for no one. When the clock struck 8, I got up to get some water. The hallway was long and dark, the fluorescent lights flickering uncomfortably. I looked around, no one was there. A creepy feeling ran down my spine. Maybe I was just too tired. But then I heard it. Footsteps. Clear and slow, as if someone were walking toward me from down the hall. I turned. No one. I swallowed, quickened my pace. But the footsteps were the same, they continued, right behind me. When I entered the office, they stopped. The air around me was thick, as if someone were standing right behind me, just a few feet away. I tried to calm myself, took a deep breath, and turned around. Nothing. I felt my chest tighten. I knew I had heard those footsteps. They were too real, too clear. I couldn't imagine them. I decided to close my laptop, pack my things quickly. I didn't want to stay here another second. As I stepped out into the hallway, a cold wind blew past, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I walked quickly, then almost ran to the elevator. Pressed the button. The doors opened slowly. And as soon as I stepped inside, I heard the footsteps start again. But this time, they were running. I hit the ground floor button hard, my heart pounding. The elevator doors closed just before anything could reach them. I stood there, cold sweat pouring down. When the doors opened in the lobby, I stepped out without looking back. I headed straight to the parking lot, driving home with a heavy feeling in my chest. I could never forget that sound. In the days that followed, I completely changed my work habits. I came in early and left before dark. I made excuses about traffic jams and personal matters so no one would suspect anything. But I knew my supervisor had noticed. One time, she asked, "You seem stressed out lately. Is something wrong?" I shook my head, smiling awkwardly. "Nothing, just a little tired." She stared at me for a moment, then nodded. I didn't dare tell anyone about the footsteps. The people I tried to talk to just laughed and said I was imagining things. But they weren't the ones who heard the sound, who felt the invisible presence right behind me. And so I avoided the 3rd floor at night. Until work dragged me into another late night. This time, I had no choice. An important report was due soon, and I couldn't finish it during office hours. I reassured myself. It's nothing. It's just fatigue. But when the clock struck 8:30, I heard it again. Footsteps. They were slow, heavy. I froze in place. I turned around. The hallway was empty. But the sound continued. They got closer. I felt my chest tighten, my pulse pounding in my ears. My throat was dry. I forced myself to speak. "Who is it?" No response. The footsteps continued, coming a few meters away, then suddenly stopping. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag and keys, running toward the elevator. The footsteps suddenly erupted behind me, faster and more intense. I pressed the button repeatedly, my hands shaking. The doors opened at the last second, and I rushed inside, slamming the ground floor button. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. I held my breath. It felt like something was standing there, just outside. The elevator doors closed. I couldn't breathe until it stopped in the lobby. I left immediately. That was the last time I worked late in this building. After that day, I made sure I left the office before 6, no matter how busy I was. I thought about checking the security cameras. But then I hesitated. If I didn't see anything, I'd start doubting myself. But if I saw something, a shadow, a shape that didn't belong in this world, I knew I'd never be able to forget it. I didn't want to know. I just made sure I never, ever stayed on the 3rd floor after sunset. And if you work somewhere like me, where the hallways get too quiet at night, listen closely. Because sometimes, the footsteps you hear may not be yours. Whispers in the dark. I have never believed in ghosts or stories of haunted places. But as soon as I entered this small apartment, I felt something was wrong. The long, narrow hallway with exposed brick walls created a strange sense of claustrophobia. My footsteps echoed as I walked through the empty living room, as if someone was echoing my movements from afar. At first, I thought it was just my imagination. The apartment was nothing special, a compact space with a living room, a cramped kitchen, and a bathroom. The view from the window was blocked by an old building across the street, making the apartment always gloomy. I tried to arrange everything neatly to make it a more pleasant place. But from the very first night, I felt something was wrong. At around 2 a.m., I was awakened by a small sound. It sounded like someone's footsteps were gently shuffling through the hallway. I jumped up, my heart pounding. I listened, trying to distinguish the sound in the quiet of the night. Another sound, slow footsteps, closer. I turned on the small nightlight beside me, straining my eyes to see the dark hallway. But there was nothing but darkness and absolute silence. I got out of bed, carefully making my way down the hallway, my socks muffling the sound of my footsteps. Everything was the same. The front door was locked, no sign of forced entry. I sighed, trying to convince myself that it was just the old wooden floor making strange noises. But a sense of unease lingered with me that night. The next few days, I tried to adjust to my new life. During the day, I packed my things, trying to make this place feel like home. I placed my desk by the window, hoping that even a little light would warm the room. But even as I tried to ignore the strange sensations, I couldn't help but notice that hallway. It always made me feel like someone was watching me, even though I couldn't see anyone. Late one evening, as I sat working, I heard another noise. This time it wasn't footsteps, but a very faint whisper. I turned off the music and listened. The whisper seemed to come from the red brick wall, vague, broken sounds, as if someone was trying to speak to me but couldn't get a complete word out. I shivered. I stood up, walked to the wall, and pressed my ear to hear better. But as I did, a strange chill ran down my neck, as if someone had just stood right next to me. I turned around in surprise. There was nothing but an empty room. I tried to shake off the absurd thought that there was someone in the apartment with me. Maybe it was the wind coming through the crack in the door. But how could there be wind when all the windows were closed? One night, as I was dozing off on the sofa, I was awakened by footsteps again. But this time, it wasn't just in the hallway. I heard it moving, from the hallway into the living room, each step slow and sure. I held my breath, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my chest. I didn't dare move. It felt like someone was standing right next to me, in the darkness. I tried to see past the dim light from the TV screen. There was no one. But the feeling of being watched was still there, stronger than ever. And then, I heard a whisper right next to my ear. "Go away." I jumped up, turned on all the lights. The apartment was still empty. But I couldn't deny what I had just heard. This time, I was sure it wasn't a hallucination. After that night, I couldn't sleep again. I started to learn about the history of this apartment, asking the neighbors around. But no one wanted to talk much about it. An old lady who lived downstairs said only one sentence before slamming the door. "If you hear anything, it's best not to answer." I decided to leave the following week. I didn't want to learn more about this place. All I knew was, there was something here, something invisible but present. And it didn't want me to stay. As I closed the door for the last time, I couldn't help but turn my head to look at the hallway one last time. It was empty, but I could feel some invisible eyes following me. I took a deep breath, grabbed my suitcase, and walked out. As I walked away, the door behind me made a slight creaking sound, as if someone had just pushed it, from the inside. Footsteps in the night. I moved into this apartment one late fall afternoon. The city was starting to get cold, but I liked the feeling, a little lonely, a little free. The apartment was small but cozy, with exposed brick walls that had a classic look that I had always loved. I thought I would enjoy my time here. But from the very first night, I began to realize that something was wrong. It was around 11 p.m., I was sitting on the sofa, the yellow light dimly shining on the books I had stacked on the shelf. I was almost asleep when suddenly, click. A noise came from the hallway. I opened my eyes, looked outside. Nothing. Maybe the neighbors. I told myself and went back to sleep. Then the noise started to repeat. At first, I thought it was just the old floorboards. This building had been there since the 1920s, so it must have been inhabited by many generations. But gradually, I noticed something strange. The footsteps always sounded when I wasn't looking. I could hear them when I turned my back, when I was standing in the kitchen, or when I was in the bathroom. But every time I went out into the hallway to check, no one was there. The strangest thing was the cold wind. Sometimes, I felt a cold breeze brush against the back of my neck, as if someone had just walked past me. One time, while I was sitting at my desk, I felt the cold wind brush against my left arm. There were no open windows in the apartment, and the heating was still on. I started having trouble sleeping. I would wake up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding, thinking that someone was standing right outside my bedroom. But every time I turned on the light, the hallway was still empty. One night, I decided to record it. I put the phone on a chair in the living room and let it record the sound all night. I wanted to see if I had actually heard footsteps or if it was just my imagination. The next morning, I played the recording back. At first, there was nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and a faint noise from outside the window. But at 3:07 a.m., I heard a noise. Not loud, but definitely a light thump, followed by a few quick taps. I shivered. I listened again. My palms were sweating. It wasn't the random sound of wind or plumbing. It sounded like footsteps. Someone was walking across the hardwood floors of my apartment. I started to feel paranoid. I checked the hallway every time I passed. I turned on the lights more often. The exposed bricks on the walls that I had once enjoyed now made me feel claustrophobic. I thought about the people who had lived here. Who were they? Did they hear these sounds? One afternoon, I called the landlord. I wanted to ask him about the history of the apartment, but I backed off and just asked about the creaking wood floors. He said that many apartments in the building had old floorboards that made noise at night, and no one had ever complained about it. I wanted to mention the footsteps, but I stopped myself. I didn't want to sound paranoid. I tried a bunch of things to make myself feel safer. I put a windbreak in front of the front door, and I closed the bathroom door at night to block out the echoes. I even put a small rug in the hallway to see if that would change the sound. But then the worst happened. The next time I heard the footsteps, they were still there, but this time, the sound was muffled by the rug. What did that mean? It meant that the footsteps were real. It meant that they were actually moving through my apartment. I couldn't pretend that it was just bare wood anymore. That night, I moved my bed closer to the window, hoping to get away from the hallway. But in the middle of the night, I woke up with a strange feeling. Footsteps, they were closer this time. I held my breath, forcing myself not to move. I felt my body tense. Someone, or something, was right there, just a few feet away. I heard a soft rustling sound, like something was scraping against the wall. My breath caught. I slowly reached for the light switch. When the light came on, I stared into the hallway. There was nothing. But I felt it. A cold shiver ran down my neck, as if someone had just been standing there, right next to me. I didn't know how long I sat there motionless. But I knew one thing, I was no longer alone. I stood there silently with my heart pounding, my arms tense, and I realized my fists were clenched. I didn't know how to fight this feeling, or even understand it. So I started spending more time outside the apartment. I'd go to a coffee shop to work on my laptop or visit friends. But every time I came home, I felt a heaviness in my heart. The hallways were the same, the tiles were the same, and the kitchen was still dark. Some nights, I considered renting somewhere else, but I wasn't sure I could break my lease without a good reason. I was also trying to save money, since the rent here was pretty cheap for the area. One evening, I decided to do a thorough inspection of the entire apartment. I turned on all the lights, opened all the closets and drawers, checked the space under the sink, behind the refrigerator, and under the bed. The result was a completely empty apartment, with no hidden entrances or hidden spaces. No vents big enough for someone to hide in. I sat down on the couch, staring into the hallway. The paint was peeling near the ceiling and the long light flickered occasionally. I felt a tension in my chest but tried to stay calm. That night, the footsteps echoed again. This time, I forced myself to say out loud, "Who's there?" My voice trembled. The footsteps stopped. A cold wind blew past my shoulder. I raised my hand to feel it, but there was no wind, just a coldness as if someone were standing right behind me. I didn't hear breathing or any movement. I stood still for a long time. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I got up, went to the living room, and left the hallway light on. I didn't sleep well. I'd been here for about a month, and every night I felt something moving in the hallway. It didn't show up in the pictures. I never saw any shapes, but I couldn't ignore the footsteps and the cold. The old walls were stained, perhaps bearing traces of people who had lived there before. But there was no evidence, no record of anything terrible happening in this building, no rumors, no dark stories. Still, I lay awake most nights, listening for the light footsteps and wondering who, or what, was sharing this space with me. I hadn't found the answers and wasn't sure if I would ever find them. But I knew one thing, I wasn't alone in my apartment. Things got worse after what should have been a normal trip. That night, I had just finished a long meeting and just wanted to get home as soon as possible. It was almost 1 a.m., and I was exhausted after hours in the stuffy conference room. I planned to take the main highway, avoiding unnecessary detours. But an accident on that route forced me to take a narrow country road. I thought this would save me time. I was wrong. At first, the road was dark but quiet. There were rows of trees on both sides, with the occasional empty field. My headlights lit up the road ahead, leaving the rest in darkness. Occasionally, I saw a few fences or small mailboxes. I expected the ride to be a little creepy because of the late hour, but I wasn't worried, just annoyed because I was so tired. I realized there were no other cars on the road. Looking at the fuel gauge, I was sure I had enough gas to get to the highway. My phone was plugged in, but I only glanced at it occasionally to check for signal. It was cold in the car because the air conditioning was still on. I left it on to help me stay awake. As I drove, I saw an old wooden sign on the side of the road, too dark to read clearly. I passed a few turns into distant houses, but there were no lights. I kept my eyes on the asphalt, driving about 40 miles an hour to avoid hitting a stray animal. It was completely silent, except for the sound of the car engine. Then I noticed something strange. About 100 yards away, there was a figure standing near a fence. At first I couldn't see clearly, so I slowed down. I thought it might be someone checking on their cattle or fields. But as I got closer, I realized the person wasn't moving. They were standing still, as if staring at me. The headlights didn't illuminate their faces. A sense of unease washed over me. I sped up, determined not to stop. As the car passed, I glanced out the window, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding. I was sure I had seen someone. But there was no trace. No footprints, no silhouette. I continued driving, haunted by fear. As I approached the highway, I glanced into the rearview mirror, and my heart stopped. In the dim light from the car's interior lights, I saw a figure sitting in the back seat. I couldn't scream. My whole body was paralyzed. I didn't dare turn around. But when I blinked again, the figure was gone. I don't remember how I got home. All I know is that, from that night on, I never. Shadow on the road. I am not a person who panics easily. I have driven home late many times, passing through deserted streets without worrying. But that night, something was different. I got off work later than usual. The city was asleep, and my way home was almost deserted. I decided to take a shortcut, a narrow, poorly lit road that ran through open fields. I had passed it many times, but I had never felt as uneasy as I did today. It was pitch black, with only my headlights cutting through the darkness. I turned on the radio, but the music did nothing to ease my tension. Suddenly, I had the feeling that someone was watching me. Then I saw it. Right on the side of the road, a few meters away from my car, there was a figure standing silently. I could only see a vague outline before the headlights flashed by. But as soon as I turned to get a better look, the person was gone. My heart was pounding. I slowed down, my eyes scanning the area. There was no one. This was a wide field, no place to hide that quickly. Maybe I imagined it. I pulled over to the side of the road. Only the sound of insects echoed in the night. I slowly lowered the window, trying to see over the fence. The wind blew softly, the grass swayed, but there was no sign that anyone had been here. My skin crawled. Part of me wanted to get out and check. But another part, my deepest instinct, was screaming, "Don't go out." I hesitated. I had a small flashlight in the center console. My hand shook slightly as I reached for it. I took a deep breath, opened the car door a crack. A cold blast of air brushed against my face. I was about to step out. But then, leaves rustled. A small sound somewhere up ahead. I held my breath, my heart pounding. Nothing. Nobody. All my senses were on edge, waiting for something. Then I felt it. Not seeing it. Not hearing it. Just feeling it. Someone, or something, was standing nearby, right there in the darkness. I suddenly realized I was shaking. I couldn't explain why, but I knew I shouldn't be here. I slammed the car door shut, locked it. I turned on the hazard lights for a moment, then turned them off. I didn't want anything out there to know I was still there. I put the car in gear, and drove slowly. I didn't push the accelerator too hard, but I didn't want to stop either. I looked in the rearview mirror. The road behind me was dark. But I felt like there were eyes watching me. My stomach tightened, my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard they turned white. I swallowed, telling myself that I was just tired, that it could just be a shadow, or some random passerby. But part of me didn't believe it. It wasn't until we got onto the main highway that I let out a sigh of relief. The streetlights and a few other cars made me feel safer. My shoulders relaxed a little, but the lingering unease lingered. When I got home, I parked in the driveway, but didn't rush out. I sat in the car for a few minutes, staring at the steering wheel, trying to make sense of what had happened. But I couldn't. And that was what scared me even more. I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, or maybe it was just a random pedestrian. But the fear didn't go away. Every night after that, whenever I closed my eyes to sleep, I saw that figure again. No face, no clear details, just a shadow. But the scary thing was, every time I saw it in my dreams, it came closer to me. I avoided that road. Even if I had to endure the traffic on the main road, I didn't want to pass by that fence again. I didn't tell anyone much about it. I mentioned it to a coworker in passing. He laughed and said I must have imagined it all because of lack of sleep. He was probably right. But my instincts didn't believe it. Then a month later, I had to stay late at work again. I planned to avoid that road completely. I never wanted to set foot there again. But then, as I drove out of town, I noticed that there was a large construction site blocking the main road. I had no choice. I had to go back to that small road. I stopped at the fork, looking at the dark path ahead. My hands gripped the wheel, my palms sweaty. My heart pounded as I slowly turned onto the familiar road. That night, I saw it again. But this time, it wasn't just standing still. It was coming toward me, whispering in the headphones. Nam is not a superstitious person. He believes in science, in reason, in things that can be explained. But that night, that belief began to waver. It all started like a normal day. Nam got off work at 8 p.m., deciding to stop by the gym before going home. The winter air was chilly, and his breath puffed out like smoke as he entered the gym door. The clatter of weights, the upbeat music, the stomping of feet on the floor, all of it blended into a familiar sound. He put down his bag, put on his wireless headphones, turned on his favorite playlist, and stepped onto the treadmill. I'll try to speed up a little today. Nam pressed the start button, letting the treadmill gradually pick up speed. The bass pounded in his ears, and he began to focus on his workout. About 10 minutes passed, everything was going normally, until a whisper sounded in the headphones. "Can you hear me?" Nam frowned. He pressed pause on the song, checked his phone. There were no calls, no notifications. The music continued to play, without any signs of interference. I must have heard wrong. Nam shook his head, pressed play and continued running. But just a few minutes later, the whisper appeared again. "Don't turn back." His whole body froze for a moment. The voice was very close, as if someone was standing right next to his ear, whispering in a ghostly way. Nam immediately took off the headphones, turned his head to look around. The gym was still normal. The others were still practicing, no one seemed to have heard what he had just experienced. A chill ran down his spine. He didn't want to think about it anymore, so he finished his workout early and left the gym. When he got home, Nam felt relieved. He told himself that maybe the headphones were faulty or the Bluetooth signal was getting noisy. To check, he turned on the music through the speaker, everything was fine. But when he put the headphones on, "It's right behind you." Nam jumped up, his heart pounding. He turned around, but the room was empty. There was no doubt about it, the whispering wasn't a technical error. Nam decided to switch to a new pair of headphones. The next day, he returned to the gym, testing the new headphones. He thought it was all over. But as soon as he started running on the treadmill, "I found you." Nam almost tripped. This time, his fear was even more obvious. He looked around frantically, but no one cared about him. Maybe it's not the headphones. Nam felt a chill down his spine. He suddenly remembered something. This gym used to be an old warehouse, where an unsolved murder took place. A warehouse worker had mysteriously disappeared 5 years ago, and his body had never been found. He tried to push the scary thought away. But no matter how many pairs of headphones he changed, no matter where he ran, the gym, the street, or at home, the whisper still followed him. And every day, it became clearer and clearer. Nam decided to look into the case from 5 years ago. He discovered something horrifying. The missing victim was named Min, a young man who worked the night shift in the old warehouse, right where the gym was now. According to the records, Min often wore headphones while working. And on the night of his disappearance, the security camera captured a strange moment. Min suddenly stopped everything, took off his headphones, looked around frantically, and then ran into the darkness. He never came back. A chill ran down Nam's spine as he looked down at his headphones. He suddenly realized, Min had heard these whispers before he disappeared. So, had Min really disappeared? Or was he still trying to communicate with this world, through the whispers in his headphones? Nam had 2 choices now. 1, he could let it all go, throw away the headphones, pretend nothing had happened. But would that mean abandoning Min forever? 2, he could try something bold, listen to those whispers, find out what Min was trying to convey. That night, Nam decided to put on his headphones again. This time, he didn't run away. He closed his eyes and listened carefully. And for the first time, the whisper became clearer than ever. Save me. Whispering on the treadmill. I have never believed in ghosts or the supernatural. I like to explain things with logic and science. But what I am about to tell you, I can't find a reasonable explanation for it. It all started a few weeks ago, when I started noticing strange things at the gym I frequent. It was a 24/7 gym, quite spacious and well-equipped. I had a year-long membership, and it was my go-to place after work to relieve stress. It all happened on a normal evening. I put on my headphones, turned on my favorite playlist, and started running on the treadmill like I always do. But after a few minutes, I heard a strange sound, a faint whisper, like someone was talking right in my ear. Startled, I took off my headphones, and looked around the gym. There was no one near me. Everyone else was busy with their workouts, no one paid any attention to me. I checked my phone, making sure there were no incoming calls, no apps open that could make a sound. I told myself that maybe I was imagining it. But then, as I continued running, the whispering came again. It wasn't clear, just a soft, drawn-out sound, like someone was trying to speak but was muffled. I strained to hear what it was saying, but all it came down to were faint S, S, and H, S. A chill ran down my spine. I quickly stopped the treadmill, took out my headphones, and got off. I looked around again. Nothing unusual. I left the gym that day with a strange sense of unease. The next few days, I continued to go to the gym. Every time, as long as I ran on that machine, the whispering would resound. I tried switching headphones, wired, wireless, even listening to music through the speakers. But the problem persisted. I started to feel paranoid. I wondered if there was a device hidden in the corner, a Wi-Fi router, or something else causing interference. I asked the gym staff, but they just shook their heads, saying they had never heard anyone complain about this. One night, I decided to go back late at night, when the gym was almost empty. I wanted to see if the noise from the people around me was unintentionally creating the effect. It was around 2 a.m. The gym was darker than usual because they had turned off some of the lights. It was just me and a night shift employee, along with 1 or 2 other gym-goers scattered around. I felt a little creepy, but I headed to the same treadmill. This time, I ran slower, paying close attention to my surroundings. At first, nothing happened. But when I increased the speed to normal, the whispering returned. It was clearer than before. I was startled, and immediately took off my headphones. But what scared me the most, was that I could still hear the whispering. No longer through the headphones. Right next to my ear. I jumped off the treadmill, my heart pounding. I turned around, looked around. The room was still quiet, only the hum of the air conditioner filling the space. This time, I didn't dare stay. I ran to the parking lot, jumped into my car, locked the door, and sat there panting. A feeling of dread swept through my body. I couldn't deny it anymore. Something was wrong with this gym. I avoided the gym for the next few days. I considered canceling my membership, but I had already paid for the year. Besides, I didn't want to be haunted by this fear. So, I went back. This time, I went during the day, when the gym was more crowded. I chose a different treadmill, as far away from the corner as possible. I put on my headphones, turned up the music, and tried to drown out all my thoughts. But I could still feel it. Not with my ears, but with my senses. A vague disturbance in my mind, as if someone was watching me. I glanced at the reflective walls. No one was there. But I still couldn't calm down. Finally, I decided that I needed to face it. I turned back to the original treadmill. Just as I started to speed up, the whispering started again. This time, I didn't take off my headphones. I closed my eyes, trying to listen. It was no longer nonsense. It was saying something. Run, go. I opened my eyes, feeling like someone had just squeezed my neck. I jumped off the treadmill, my heart pounding. Panic was rising, but I forced myself to stand still, breathing deeply. No. I couldn't let this continue. I stared at the treadmill, then around the gym. No one seemed to notice me. No one heard what I heard. Maybe I needed to learn more about this place. Maybe there was a reason, a story I didn't know. But before I could decide what to do next, a shadow was reflected in the treadmill screen. I spun around. No one was there. But I swear, I saw someone standing right behind me. Night shifts in the warehouse. I had never liked running, but I couldn't stop. I felt the cold breath on my ear, an invisible presence that followed my every step. I knew it wouldn't go away anytime soon, but I hoped that one day, things would return to normal. Until then, I couldn't help but look back over my shoulder, expecting someone to be standing right behind me. But there was always no one. I was used to this feeling. But from the moment I walked into that warehouse that first night, I knew something was wrong. My name is Mark, I'm 35 years old. I used to have a steady job, but after I quit, my finances fell into disrepair. I needed money fast, so when I saw a job posting for a night shift in an industrial warehouse on the outskirts of town, I immediately accepted. The job seemed easy, just take inventory, update the catalog, and make sure everything was in its place. The warehouse was huge, with corrugated metal roof and walls, and rows of shelves that nearly reached the ceiling. There was only me and a security guard patrolling outside. I remember the first night I walked in, the air in the warehouse felt heavier than usual. The room was vast, rows of metal shelves, white fluorescent lights flickering overhead. I told myself I was probably just tired. But as I walked down the aisles, I began to notice cold spots, places where the air suddenly felt cooler, as if something were moving through them. At first, I tried to ignore them. But by the third or fourth night, things got weirder. I was checking out an old shipment in the far corner of the warehouse when I heard a scraping sound from across the aisle. It sounded like a crate being dragged across a concrete floor. My heart was pounding. I stopped, listening. I grabbed my flashlight and turned the corner. But when I got there, everything was still there. The boxes were still stacked neatly, with no signs of movement. I told myself it was probably just the wind. But as I turned back to work, I couldn't help but notice small noises, metal contracting in the heat, a rattle on the roof, or even a very faint breath somewhere in the vicinity. I didn't tell the security guard about this. He was just patrolling outside and would probably think I was paranoid. I decided to observe more on my own. The next night, I brought a small radio for background noise, but the signal was weak, mostly static. This only made me more nervous. Around midnight, I got that feeling again, the feeling of being watched. I stopped in the middle of an aisle, slowly raised my head, and shined my flashlight on the shelves above. All I could see was dusty steel bars and boxes. But my skin crawled. I continued working, but around 2 a.m., I noticed something unusual. In the main hallway of the warehouse, which was usually the brightest, because it was a daytime loading area, I saw a stack of boxes blocking the way. They hadn't been there an hour ago. I was sure I hadn't put them there. I slowly approached, the flashlight shaking in my hand. And then I saw it. On one of the boxes, there was a dusty handprint. But this one didn't look human, it was long and had strange fingers. I took a step back, a chill running down my spine. I turned, intending to head back toward the office to check the security cameras, but another sound came from behind me. A low, distorted, almost inhuman laugh. I froze. I couldn't breathe. I turned my flashlight around, but there was nothing there. Just a row of silent shelves. I decided that for the night, I would talk to the security guard, ask him to check the area again. I quickly left the main hallway, trying not to run. But just as I got closer to the office, I heard another set of footsteps, slow, heavy footsteps, right behind me. I turned around. No one there. But on the concrete floor, I saw footprints. Wet, trailing from the hallway I had just left. They appeared right in front of me. And I could swear they were still going on, even though no one was there. I rushed into the office, locking the door behind me. I sat down, shaking my phone, intending to call security. But when I opened the security camera, the screen showed an image that made my heart stop. In the main hallway I had just left, a dark figure stood motionless among the stacks of boxes. It was tall, thin, faceless. But I knew it was watching me. The lights in the office went out. And I heard a knock on the door, slow, patient. Knock. 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 I didn't dare breathe. After a few seconds, the knocking stopped. I waited, my heart pounding in my chest. I looked at the camera screen again. The hallway was empty. But right outside the office door, on the concrete floor, I saw a dusty handprint, right under the doorknob. I didn't come back to work the next night. I quit immediately. But sometimes, at night, I still feel like someone is there. The night in the warehouse genre. I am Min, a night shift warehouse worker. The job is interesting, but I need the money, so I don't think much about it. But then, things start to happen that I can't ignore. It all started on a cold night. I was patrolling the back of the warehouse, which was filled with old crates. As my flashlight swept over, I noticed a converted crate. The marks on the concrete floor were still fresh. The upgrade truck was still locked, no one could move it. A larger vertical life was behind me. A cold breeze passed through the back of my neck. I turned my flashlight up to the ceiling. Something had just moved, very fast, too fast for me to see. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding. I automatically thought it was just a bird. I went back to work today, determined to find out the truth. I walked around the house, taking notes of the location of the items. In the middle of the night, I discovered a layer of small boxes lying across the beach. We had not been there before. Who did this? I was angry, feeling like I was being teased. I pushed them aside, ran outside to question the guard. But he just shook his head, no one comes in here. 2 hours before dawn, I climbed the ladder to check the shelves on high. Then a soft metal-on-metal sound rang out right behind me. I turned around, nothing. But then, a loud noise came from the shelf next to me. I rushed over, a metal jewel had fallen to the ground. It had been on the second shelf, but now it lay on its side on the floor. I looked calmly, nothing was disturbed, as if the ring had fallen by itself. Cold sweat broke out on my hair. I put the old box back, turned around and left. But after only a few steps, I heard a rattling sound. I turned around, the box was on the floor again. I froze. The lights flickered. A long shadow appeared and disappeared on the steel bar. I shined the flashlight, but couldn't see anything clearly. My heart was pounding, my breathing was rapid. I felt like something was watching me. I decided to leave immediately. I reported everything to the manager the next morning. He smiled faintly, saying that I could take a night off if I felt stressed. But I knew I wasn't imagining it. I continued to work, but I always felt like there was an invisible pair of eyes watching me from above. The mysterious sound still rang out every night, and the powder boxes still switched automatically. One day, I wondered, was I the only one working here? Mystery in the attitude. I moved into this house less than a week ago. It was an old house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing special except for the faded wood paneling in the slightly shabby porch. I liked the space, it felt old, cozy, and most importantly, within my budget. But the first night, I knew something was wrong. The noise. At first, I thought it was just the sound of wood expanding due to temperature changes. The house was old, and strange noises were inevitable. But as I sat on the sofa, my eyes glued to the TV, I sensed an invisible tension in the air. The TV was on, but I couldn't concentrate. I turned the volume down. Again. A faint creaking sound came from the ceiling. Like someone was walking slowly up the attic. I tried to calm myself down. Mice, maybe. Or stray cats. I told myself I'd check in the morning. But when I got into bed, I couldn't sleep. My ears pricked up, waiting for the next sound. And then it came. The scratching. Right above me. I woke earlier than usual, partly because of the morning light, partly because the fear from last night still haunted me. I stepped out into the hallway, looked up at the loft panel. It was just a small square of wood, slightly bent at one corner, probably because time had worn it out. I took a deep breath, grabbed the pull cord, and yanked. Crack. The loft door swung open, an old wooden ladder creaking as I pulled it down. Dust fell, floating in the air. I stood at the bottom of the steps, holding my flashlight up to shine into the darkness above. The loft was smaller than I'd expected. Old wooden planks lined up side by side, a few cobwebs clinging to the corners. There were no windows, just thick darkness beyond the reach of my flashlight. I took a breath, then climbed up. The air in the place was stale, musty, as if no one had been in there for years. I swept my flashlight around, looking for signs of rats or other animals. But I saw nothing. Just dust, a few cardboard boxes stacked on top of each other, and a pile of old newspapers in the corner. I bent down and picked up a newspaper. It was 10 years old. A strange feeling crept into my mind. The noises I heard last night, definitely not rats. And then I heard a small clicking sound behind me. I spun around, holding my flashlight straight into the darkness. Nothing. But the feeling that something was here with me was still there. I swallowed, determined to leave immediately. As I turned to go down the stairs, I accidentally bumped into a stack of boxes. They tilted, making a rustling sound, and one of the boxes opened. Inside were old clothes, shirts, trousers, all neatly folded. But there was something unusual. I bent down and lifted the fabric. A diary. The cover was faded, the paper inside was yellowed. I opened the first page, the handwriting was neat, the ink somewhat blurred. August 15, 2013. I heard a noise in the attic. At first, I thought it was a mouse. But now I'm not so sure. I shivered. Had the previous owner of the house heard this noise too? I flipped through the pages. The writing became more and more chaotic. August 23rd, the noises don't stop. I know someone's up there. August 27th, I locked the attic door. But every morning when I wake up, it's open. September 3rd, I see shadows in the night. I have to leave. I felt my breathing quicken. Then I noticed something even more terrifying. On the last page, there was a faint trace. As if someone had placed a bloody hand on it. A cracking sound came from behind me. I froze. The light from the flashlight dimmed, as if something had drained its energy. And in the darkest corner of the attic, I saw it. A shadow, standing silently, its lifeless eyes staring at me. I don't remember how I got out of there. I remember my heart pounding and my body going cold as I rushed down the stairs, slammed the attic door shut, and pushed a cupboard in to block it out. The noises continued that night. But this time, I didn't dare check. The next morning, I called the broker and asked to sell the house. He just laughed and told me not to worry. "I'm sure it's just my imagination," he said. The previous owner said the same thing before he left. I was cold. Maybe that's why the house was so cheap. And maybe I wasn't the only one who had heard noises in the attic. The ghost mirror in the attitude. That night, I couldn't sleep. The house was old, its wooden walls creaking as the night wind crept through the cracks of the doors. But what made me uneasy wasn't the normal sounds of an old house, it was the strange chanting that echoed somewhere in the attic. I had researched this house before. It had belonged to a wealthy family from the previous century, but tragedy had struck. The last owner was found dead in the attic, in front of a large mirror. The police couldn't explain the cause of death, only that there were faint handprints on the mirror, as if someone had touched it from the inside. I had tried to ignore the rumors, but tonight, the chanting was too much to ignore. I decided to grab a flashlight and a little courage, and go up to the attic once more. The loft door creaked as I pushed it open. The air inside smelled of damp wood and dust. I shined my flashlight around the room, the light glimmering over broken crates, rotting books, and mysterious vintage suitcases. But just when I thought I might have imagined it all, I heard it, chanting. It was faint at first, as if it were coming from another room. I turned off the flashlight, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. Big mistake. The space was pitch black, and for a moment, I felt as if someone was standing right behind me. I turned the flashlight back on immediately and turned around. Nothing. But then, the light from the flashlight hit something in the corner of the room. A large mirror, covered in dust. It stood there, silent, like an invisible observer. And as soon as I looked into the mirror, a chill ran down my spine. I approached, slowly and carefully. As I raised my hand to wipe the dust off the glass, my image gradually became clearer. But something was wrong. I blinked. The reflection was still staring at me, but its eyes were colder, more lifeless than mine. The chanting began to get louder, pounding into my ears like invisible hammer blows. I felt my chest tighten, my breathing quicken. I wanted to step back, but my feet felt glued to the floor. Then I saw it. In the mirror, something moved. Not me. A shadowy figure flickered in and out of my reflection. It had no eyes, no mouth, just a shadowy entity standing there, right behind me. I swallowed, my heart pounding so hard I could hear each beat echoing in my head. I didn't dare turn around. I stared at the reflection, hoping I was hallucinating. But then, the creature smiled. The twisted smile stretched to the sides of my cheeks, revealing dark gaps like bottomless pits. I screamed, but the sound stuck in my throat. The mirror shook, cracks spreading like spiderwebs. The chanting reached its climax, like hundreds of voices screaming in unison. I jerked back, finally regaining control of my legs. I reached for the doorknob, but as soon as I touched it, a cold air rushed into my palm. The chanting stopped abruptly. The silence was more terrifying than anything. The mirror shattered. Then. Bang! The mirror shattered. Shards of glass flew everywhere. I dashed out of the loft, slammed the door, and sank down into the hallway, gasping for air. Everything was quiet again. I looked down at my hand. A faint red mark appeared on my skin, as if someone had just squeezed my wrist. I don't know how long I sat there, but when I regained my composure, I decided to do the only thing that would make me feel safer. I took the hammer, went back to the loft, and smashed the rest of the mirror. Shards flew everywhere, the distorted reflections completely destroyed. I hoped that this would be the end of it. But that night, as I fell asleep, I dreamed of another mirror. In the dream, I stood before it, and the reflection was still smiling. The mirror in the attitude. This house had been in my family for 3 generations. It was nothing special, just an old house with long hallways, creaky wooden floors, and an attic that no one in the family frequented. I had never paid much attention to the attic. Until one night, when I heard a strange sound coming from above. It wasn't the scurrying of mice or the sound of wind blowing through the cracks in the door. It was a low, steady sound, like chanting. I looked up at the ceiling, where the small attic door was. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But the next night, the chanting came again. This time, it was clearer. I couldn't ignore it any longer, so I went upstairs. I pushed open the attic door. The musty smell hit me. The room was dark, save for the dim light from my flashlight, which swept across the dusty piles of old things. Then I saw it. A large mirror, almost as tall as me, leaned against the far wall. The frame was carved with strange symbols, lines that twisted together like an ancient language. And the mirror, it didn't reflect me. I held my breath. I should have seen my reflection, but the mirror showed only an empty room. Then, from within the mirror, I heard chanting. Not from the room. From within the mirror. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Suddenly, the flashlight vibrated in my hand. For a moment, I saw a shadowy figure in the mirror, someone standing right inside, staring out at me. I screamed, ran out of the attic, and slammed the door. I never returned to the attic again after that night. But the strange things didn't stop there. One morning, when I woke up, I found the diary on my desk open. I was sure I had closed it the night before. On the page, a line in red appeared. 7:15 a.m., brush teeth. I felt a chill down my spine. That was exactly the time I brushed my teeth this morning. But I had never written it down. The next day, the lines continued to appear. 8:30 a.m., drink coffee. 12:15 p.m., check phone 6 times. Someone, or something, was watching me. I struggled to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had written in the diary unconsciously while I was asleep. Or had someone broken into my house. But when I checked the windows and doors, they were all locked. One night, while I was sleeping, I felt someone standing in the room. I opened my eyes. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing silently in the corner of the room. I turned on the light. No one was there. But when I looked at the diary, a new line was written on the page. I am standing in the corner. I felt my blood freeze. I decided that it was time to face my fear. I went up to the attic. The door opened easily, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The mirror was still there. But this time, I saw my reflection. But something was wrong. My reflection didn't look exactly like me. It stood straighter, its eyes sharper. And, it was smiling. But I wasn't smiling. Then, it raised its hand. And I felt an invisible force pulling me forward. I struggled, trying to retreat, but my legs felt like they were being sucked into something invisible. Then I fell into the mirror. I felt myself falling, as if into an endless void. When I opened my eyes, I was still in the attic. But, something was wrong. Everything looked the same, but not quite the same. The light was dimmer, the air was denser, as if compressed. I turned to look at the mirror. On the other side, I saw the normal attic, and me. Or someone who looked like me, was standing outside the mirror, staring at me. It tilted its head, then slowly raised its hand to wave at me. I screamed, hitting the mirror. But no sound came out. Outside, I picked up the diary, opened a new page, and began writing. I took his place. I didn't know how long I had been trapped here. Outside, the other person was living my life. Doing everything I used to do. And no one knows that I'm locked in here. The words in the diary continue to appear, but this time, I'm not the one reading them. What about you? Are you sure that the image in the mirror is still you? Take another good look. And don't let it smile. The mirror in the attitude. This house had been in my family for 3 generations. It was nothing special, just an old house with long hallways, creaky wooden floors, and an attic that no one in the family frequented. I had never paid much attention to the attic. Until one night, when I heard a strange sound coming from above. It wasn't the scurrying of mice or the sound of wind blowing through the cracks in the door. It was a low, steady sound, like chanting. I looked up at the ceiling, where the small attic door was. A chill ran down my spine. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination. But the next night, the chanting came again. This time, it was clearer. I couldn't ignore it any longer, so I went upstairs. I pushed open the attic door. The musty smell hit me. The room was dark, save for the dim light from my flashlight, which swept across the dusty piles of old things. Then I saw it. A large mirror, almost as tall as me, leaned against the far wall. The frame was carved with strange symbols, lines that twisted together like an ancient language. And the mirror, it didn't reflect me. I held my breath. I should have seen my reflection, but the mirror showed only an empty room. Then, from within the mirror, I heard chanting. Not from the room. From within the mirror. I stepped back, my heart pounding. Suddenly, the flashlight vibrated in my hand. For a moment, I saw a shadowy figure in the mirror, someone standing right inside, staring out at me. I screamed, ran out of the attic, and slammed the door. I never returned to the attic again after that night. But the strange things didn't stop there. One morning, when I woke up, I found the diary on my desk open. I was sure I had closed it the night before. On the page, a line in red appeared. 7:15 a.m., brush teeth. I felt a chill down my spine. That was exactly the time I brushed my teeth this morning. But I had never written it down. The next day, the lines continued to appear. 8:30 a.m., drink coffee. 12:15 p.m., check phone 6 times. Someone, or something, was watching me. I struggled to find a reasonable explanation. Maybe I had written in the diary unconsciously while I was asleep. Or had someone broken into my house. But when I checked the windows and doors, they were all locked. One night, while I was sleeping, I felt someone standing in the room. I opened my eyes. In the dim light, I saw a figure standing silently in the corner of the room. I turned on the light. No one was there. But when I looked at the diary, a new line was written on the page. I am standing in the corner. I felt my blood freeze. I decided that it was time to face my fear. I went up to the attic. The door opened easily, as if it had been waiting for me all along. The mirror was still there. But this time, I saw my reflection. But something was wrong. My reflection didn't look exactly like me. It stood straighter, its eyes sharper. And, it was smiling. But I wasn't smiling. Then, it raised its hand. And I felt an invisible force pulling me forward. I struggled, trying to retreat, but my legs felt like they were being sucked into something invisible. Then I fell into the mirror. I felt myself falling, as if into an endless void. When I opened my eyes, I was still in the attic. But, something was wrong. Everything looked the same, but not quite the same. The light was dimmer, the air was denser, as if compressed. I turned to look at the mirror. On the other side, I saw the normal attic, and me. I, or someone who looked like me, was standing outside the mirror, staring at me. It tilted its head, then slowly raised its hand to wave at me. I screamed, hitting the mirror. But no sound came out. Outside, I picked up the diary, opened a new page, and began writing. I took his place. I didn't know how long I had been trapped here. Outside, the other person was living my life. Doing everything I used to do. And no one knows that I'm locked in here. The words in the diary continue to appear, but this time, I'm not the one reading them. What about you? Are you sure that the image in the mirror is still you? Take another good look. And don't let it smile,